Okay, so today there's a couple things I want to cover in this first video. I'm just going to UV unwrap this couch. That's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to worry about texturing right now. I'm just going to worry about the unwrapping. Maybe we'll do the texturing in the next video, either on this couch or maybe on a work table. But I just want to focus on that here, so let's get started. I've got my UV editor open right here. Oh, that didn't open it. Why did that happen? Good start. And I got my UV toolkit there. Okay, and I've got my couch. Now, the cushions are all separate objects. I've not done anything to them. Well, these two cushions are separate objects. The back cushions I actually modeled as part of the couch because that's how the couch was created. And then I have the feet as their own objects. So I'm just going to hide the feet with Control H. Don't need those right now. And let's start with just this cushion. I'm going to click on this button right here, which is the Isolate Select. So I select the cushion, click on that, and then it isolates whatever I have selected. So I can just focus on that. Now you can see that there are some seams here, and that's just left over from the default cube. You know, as I talked about last week, any primitive has default UVs already assigned to them, and very rarely do you actually want to stay with those. So the first step to UV unwrapping is actually deleting the UV. So UV menu and delete. Those go away. And now we can begin. And I'm going to begin by just projecting. So in my UV toolkit, I'm going to select planar projection, shift left click on it to open up the options, and I want to choose the perpendicular axis to, you know, kind of the main face. So it's going to be the y-axis is perpendicular. Click project, and this is what my UVs look like. I can turn on my checkerboard pattern temporarily and kind of see how that projects. That's looking pretty good right there. But on the sides, they appear more as stripes than they do squares because they're not unwrapped properly. So we need to add some seams. But I'm good with the top and I'm good with the bottom. So I'm going to leave those the way that they are. So let me hide the UV editor for a minute. And this is the problem that I was worried about as I was recording. Maybe if I bring that up, it'll be okay. It seems to be okay if I just work on a smaller screen. I wonder if it's a memory issue. Okay, so when I'm thinking about where I'm going to be placing these seams, I tend to find fabric a little bit easier because fabric naturally has seams in it as it was created in the real world, and it's a kind of a great starting place to just find where those seams actually are in the real world and then apply them to your object here. And I modeled these cushions with some piping around the edges. So if I kind of deselect, you can see this piping detail that goes around the edge, and that's a great place to just hide some seams in those little crevices. So I'm going to go to edge mode, and I'm going to zoom in here, and I've got some edges that are really buried in there. I'm also going to hit 1 on the number pad to make sure I get the right edge. So I'm going to grab this inside edge here. Okay, that's a super hidden edge. If I go into wireframe, I can kind of just make sure that that is going all the way around, and it looks like it is. So now that I have that whole edge selected, I'm going to click in my UV toolkit. I'm going to click cut. It's going to add a seam right there. And I'm going to do the same thing on the underside of this piping. The piping I'm going to leave separate. So I'll click that, and I will cut the seam there. And then down here, same sort of thing. Click on that edge that should go all the way around. Easy just to zoom in here. Oops. Make sure I got the right edge. Good. Click cut, and then the last one is on the underside here. Same thing. You can see as I'm trying to zoom in, it's going really slow. I can just select one edge and hit F to frame it up, and it will kind of reset my zoom. And then that's the edge that I want from under there, so I'll click cut that. Now, if I go and hold down the right mouse button, I can choose, instead of selecting edges, I can go to UVs and select UV shells. And now I have a few different shells. You can see that there's some parity between the perspective view and the UV editor. So I'm going to select this first UV shell and just hit W to move it, and I'll just move it off to the side. I'm not going to worry about fitting them all into this 0 to 1 space right now. That can be later. I can move the bottom part off to the side down there. Right? So now I just have this center shell, which I can't really... I mean, if I click unfold right now, it's just going to turn into a mess, and I don't want that. So I'm going to need to add another seam or two. And the backs of these cushions aren't going to be visible to the eye, so I'm just going to put a couple seams here. I'm going to put one... I don't want to go that whole way. I'm just going to go from here to here. Whoops. Here, shift, double click there. It's going to select the whole edge. Excuse me. And I'm going to cut that. And then same thing on this edge there. Shift, double click, and cut that. So now, that's a separate shell. I'm going to click unfold on that. And that stretched it out quite a bit. So I'm going to unfold along... It doesn't really matter which one. Okay, I'm just going to move that off to the side. That's looking better. And now let's unfold this one as well. And that just doesn't like behaving. And I'm sure this little bump out part is not helping. So let's add a couple more seams. Again, this right here isn't going to be visible to anybody, so we'll cut that, and then I can grab that shell and unfold it and then move it out of the way. And then I've got this whole thing, and this is still not gonna unfold too great. Yeah, okay. So let's... Where are my seams? There we go. Okay. So if I click straighten shell here, or straighten UVs, there we go. It's gonna kind of sort things out and not make them quite so messy. I still don't think it's gonna work on. No. So that's not what we want there. Let's try... I want to keep this front face clean. Don't really want to add more seams, but I guess I'll add... I guess I will. So let's cut that. Again, this is a shell that's not going to be very visible, so we can unfold that. We'll straighten that out. And I'm not worried about the orientation of these right now. I'm just worried about getting them straight. So, yeah, this one really does not want to unfold very cleanly. I don't like how stretched out that is, and that's going to be like if I turn on my checkerboard now, you can see that is just awful. So I could manually come in here and try to straighten that out, but it's skewed and it's weird, and it's going to be easier to just... Oh! Well, suddenly decided to start working. Okay. So that's close. Let's move this down here. We'll straighten that out a little bit. And then I just have this little side here. I could either cut another seam, but I don't really want to. So what I'm going to do is adjust these UVs manually. So I know that I want these UVs to line up there. And I turned on point snapping. It works the same way in the UV editor as it does in the viewport. So it can be good if you know that these need to be the same height. It can help quite a bit in that regard. Let's see. Let's move these over. Let's see what we got here. So we've got 3 rows of UVs here that need to all get adjusted. So I'm going to select them in my viewport. Hit F to frame them up. And I'm just going to start with this row here. Okay, again, with the parity between the viewport and the UV image editor. Come on, now let me move them. There we go. Okay. Now, right now I'm just trying to separate them. I will even them out after. Alright, move those over. Oh, I missed one. Move those over there. And then I can grab all of these and move those over there. Okay. Good. Now, again, I just want to keep these straightened out, so I'm going to turn on my point snapping, and I know this needs to be down here. I know that needs to be down here. Keep those even. That needs to be up there. I think I've got one more row of UVs in here. I do. Okay. So this row right there. Oh. Turn off snapping. There we go. Okay. So now I can snap these down. Just keeping those even all the way across. Good. Actually, let me just select all these UVs. And it's straight. No, no, that didn't work. Okay, I won't straighten them that way. I will continue to do this manually. So bring that down. Bring that up. Nope. Bring that up. Come on. There we go. The fun and exciting world of UV editing. Just go in that direction. There we go. Okay. And you see all of these all the way across need to be adjusted so that they're going in the right direction. Then once you get them kind of vertically in place, right, because this cushion is the same thickness all the way around, and that's why I'm lining up these UVs. Because they should be same. And I know that's not perfect, but I'm just going to go on because you get the idea. Now you can see that the squares are stretched along, around this corner. So now I can select these parts, and this we're going to start with right over here, I believe. Okay, and so these squares to be lined up, and then I can grab that section and move those over. There we go. That's looking pretty square. And I'll grab these. That's looking better. Oh, I accidentally grabbed the other UV shell, so now I got to redo that. Turn off snapping as well. It's always good to pay attention to what you're selecting. Did it again. Okay. So we can move that over. Again, looking for squares so that when I actually apply an image texture to this, it's not distorted. Something like that. This can actually move in a little bit. And this last little row, we'll call it that. Good. All right. So now that I have my UVs all separated, the next thing to do is going to be to make them all the same relative size. Because right now, if I apply... Ooh, that is not okay. What happened there? What happened here? Why are you bad? Don't be bad. Be good. Alright. This looks like I need to make some adjustments, but you're never going to see that part, so I'm just going to pretend it's not there. You shouldn't do that yourself unless you know it's not going to be seen. Then it's fine. Okay, so now I need to make them all the same size so that the texture, when I apply it to all the different parts, the texture itself is the same size. We don't have really large threads in one part and really small threads in the other part. To do that, I'm going to select one shell. So I'll grab this top cushion part. And I'm going to go in my UV toolkit. In the transform section, we have Texel Density. Okay, that you can think of it like the size of these squares. It's referring to how much texture information is, contained in one pixel per unit. So I'm going to click Get on that one, and that's going to tell me what the Texel density is on this shell. And then I can select the other shells and click Set, and it will set them all to the same Texel density, which in turn makes them all the same UV size. Now, there's a couple other things that I want to do here. One other thing I want to do before I lay this out, and that is thinking about all of these different UV shells, and the ones that are and are not going to be seen. I don't really need to waste texture space on parts of this mesh that aren't going to be seen. Now, be careful with making the assumptions here, because maybe sometime down the road you actually want to model this or arrange this couch so that maybe the cushions are off or separated or at an angle and you are seeing more of the cushions than you initially expect to. In that case, you're going to want to texture everything. But let's say, for instance, this back shell here, I'm not going to ever see that. Then what I can do is I can select that and I can just scale it down. Okay, so it's going to take up less space in my texture map. And I can save space for the things that I want to have more texture. Same thing with this piping. I'm going to I'm going to give that just a shader. I'm not going to texture it. So I'm just going to leave that separate, or not separate, but I'm just going to scale it way down, right there. And now I can lay everything out in that 0 to 1 space. So I've got everything selected, and now I can go in my UV toolkit down to Arrange and Layout, that section, and just click Layout. And what Maya is going to do is it's going to try to pack everything in. Some programs do call it pack. It's trying to pack everything into this 0 to 1 space. Right, this is the texture space. And it does a pretty good job. It's not always perfect, but it generally does a good job. You know, one thing that you can do, if you see, like, you could make this a little bit more optimized. If I rotate this 90 degrees, I'll move it down there, and I'll rotate that 90 degrees. Whoops. And move that down here. I can actually take this, move it over there, move that there. Now I can select everything. I'm going to hold down the D key to move my pivot point down to this corner. And I can scale everything up together. You want to scale it all together so it stays uniform. And you're going to scale it up just a little bit more, get a little bit more texture space out of it. Once you have all of your UVs laid out, now you're ready to export it so that you can bring it into Photoshop and actually start creating those textures. So to do that, you go to Image and UV Snapshot. You can set your location. By default, Maya will look in your project's source images folder. From there, I'm going to create a new subfolder, and I'm going to call it Couch Textures. Click Open. And now I can name it. And I will name this Couch UVs. Click Save. Now you can set your image format. JPEG is fine. Size, I'm going to stick with a 2K texture. You want to make sure you lock the aspect ratio. And then you can set your edge color. I'm going to keep it at white, but you can set that to any color that you want. But yes, I'm going to keep it at white, and you'll see why here in a minute. And then everything else is fine, so I'm going to click Apply and Close. Failed to output the file. Well, that's fun. Okay, let's try that one more time and see if we can't get it to actually work. So we go to Image, UV Snapshot, Browse. Here's my project, Source Images folder, Couch Textures, and we'll call this Couch UVs. Click Apply and Close. There we go. It worked. I can see in my Finder window, there is my UV map. So it exports the UVs with white lines, as I told it to, on a black background. Now, what I can do is I can open that up in Photoshop. All right, and now I can start bringing in textures. So let me find a cloth texture here real quick. Okay, so now I have this plain fabric texture. Now this is just a small preview thing, but it's of decent scale. So I'm going to bring it into my Photoshop scene. Well, when I say decent scale, it is a bit small. But what we can do, I don't know why it's not coming in at 100%. Bring that in, hit return, and that's really not a great. All right, hold on a second. So I'll bring that into Photoshop. And I'm just going to hit return. Let me get rid of that other texture because it's terrible. Now, this is just a free sample of a tileable texture. The nice thing about it being a tileable texture is that you can tile it. So I'm going to put it in the corner, and I'm going to duplicate it, or copy and paste it. Now you can see that this isn't, as you start to tile this texture, you can see that it is not quite as even as you might initially like it to be. So there's one thing that you can kind of do that sometimes works to even out these textures is, if I get rid of these, I'm going to open this up in its own Photoshop document. And I'm going to duplicate the layer. I'm going to invert the layer. And then I'm going to blur the layer. So I'm going to go to Filter, Blur. So where's the Gaussian blur? There it is. Gaussian blur and something kind of like that. So you still see some variation. Click OK, and then I'm going to set it to overlay. And it just kind of, it'll even out the tones a little bit sometimes. Might have blurred it a little bit too much, so I'm going to step backwards. And then we'll blur that one more time. Just set a little bit lower. Alright, set it there. And set it to overlay. It's just going to even out those tones a little bit. So I'll save that. Okay. Now I can come back to my other document. I'll get rid of that version. I'll bring the new one in, which is this PSD right there. And hopefully those tiles won't look quite so obvious. But we'll find out now. I'd say that's better. It was a trick I learned, I don't know, 10 years ago. There may be other ways to do that, but that's the way that I know. And now you know. All right, so once I get one row done, I'm going to select all those layers in that row. I'm going to group them into one folder, and now I can just duplicate that group. Oh, come on, it's like the whole group. I want to auto-select group. There we go. And duplicate that again. I'll select all three groups. Oops. I'll duplicate all those. I do have snapping turned on in Photoshop, which, if you're not familiar, is in View Snap. Turn that on and it'll snap to the edge of the previous layer, which is nice and handy. And I will snap that in there. Okay. So now we have our fabric texture established. Again, you can see that it is tileable, or that it is tiles. You know, there are more elaborate ways that you can make sure something is truly seamless and less obvious. There are videos out there for it. I'm not going to spend the time on that today. But now that I have my whole texture established, I'm just going to put that in its own group. I'm going to duplicate that group and merge it. And I can, the construction group. I'm going to also duplicate my UV layer, and I'm going to move that UV layer on top. And now, the reason why I kept this black and white is I can set my UVs and set the blending mode to screen. And now you can see the white UVs over top of the texture. If you have something that is predominantly bright, then you can invert the layer, the UV layer. So you just select the layer, hit Command or Control I to invert it, and then instead of screen, you hit multiply, and you'll have the black lines over the top. So you can go either way. Or if you wanted to make those UVs purple or blue or whatever, you could do that too. So I'm going to undo back a few. I'll go back to screen. Now, I've got this that's most of the way towards a color texture, and actually I could export this right now. When you export, make sure you turn off the UV layer so you don't have those lines on your actual object. And I just do a save for web. I'm going to keep it at 2048 square. Click save and go to my source images folder, couch textures, and I will call this couch_color. Okay, and click save. Now let's jump back into Maya and see how we're doing. Let me close the UV editor. I'm just going to go to object mode, and we need to give it a new material. So I'm going to right click on it, assign new material. I'm going to choose my Arnold standard surface shader. I will open up my hypershade. Here it is. Now with this standard surface, first I'm going to call it couch fabric matte for material, and general settings before I apply any image textures. We've got the color is going to be defined by the image texture. Not going to have any metalness. Specularity. I'm just going to bump the roughness up quite a bit. Something like that. We can deal with that more later. Now, on my color, I'm going to click on the Add Texture button, go down to 2D Texture, add a file texture, and click on the file. And you can see because I have my project set, it brings me right to my source images folder, and there's my couch textures, couchcolor.png. Click Open. And now, in the viewport, I'm going to hit 3 to go in the shaded or smoothed preview, and then 6 to preview my textures. And now you can see that I have a couch cushion. Now the piping around the edges, you can see that I actually should have gone a little bit further in with my seams. Okay, so I probably should have looked a little bit closer at that before I exported. But the rest of it is looking pretty okay. Now, this could be fine for your color texture. You could also go a little bit further with it. In Photoshop, if I turn these UVs back on, I'm going to actually lock that layer. Usually couches, unless they're brand new, have a little bit of wear and tear to them. So what you could do, I'm going to add a new layer underneath my UVs. And this is easier if you have a pen tablet, but I'm just going to open up a brush, and I'm going to right-click, oops, brush, and what is it? I thought it was right-click. I don't know if Photoshop shortcuts nearly as well. I'll just open up my brush settings, and I'll go with a big soft brush. Go a little bit larger than that. You can go bigger. Let's go. That'll work. And I'm going to set my opacity to like 20%. And I'm going to double check in Maya. If I go to UV shell, I pull up both my UV editor and my object. Okay, so the bottom shell is the top side of the cushion. That's what I needed to know for Photoshop. So usually people sit in the middle of cushions, so whoops, we don't want that to be green. That's an odd choice. Those are Joker colors, okay. Let's go with white. And I'm just going to very slightly lighten that up a little bit. And again, I got a very transparent brush. I'm at 20%. You could even go down to 10%. Also, again, this is easier with a tablet. But maybe it's a little bit lighter there. And maybe I went, I'll often kind of overpaint and go a little overboard when I'm painting these because it's its own layer. I can then back it off and I can just bring that opacity down. Okay, and I can make that as subtle as I want that to be. Maybe somebody spilled coffee on the couch at some point. Now you can take a brown brush. You could either find an image of a coffee stain, or you could just take a brush, something that feels like it could be a stain. Maybe this. What is that going to do? Actually, before I do that, let me do a new layer, and I'll go 100% opacity. Now maybe there's something like right there. Whatever. We'll go with that, and then I'll just re-export that, and I'll just overwrite the file. And then I can come back into Maya in my hypershade. Let me actually go back into object mode there. Turn off my UV editor. Okay, and you can see that it updated. And we've got our stain on the couch. We've got kind of a lighter area where it's a little bit more worn. Yeah, I'm glad you're not going to see that on the rest of the couch. All right, so there's our couch cushion. You're also not tied to the image or the color of the source of the reference that you found. You can always take Take that, we can add a solid color. Maybe it's going to be a blue couch. Let's go something, that's not a good blue. Okay, maybe it's that color blue. And then we can set that blending mode to like an overlay, right? Let's make that a little more on the gray side of things. Okay, save that back out. Jump back into Maya. I don't know why I wanted tab to work there. It wasn't going to work. If it doesn't load, just navigate back to your color input and reselect it. And there's your blue couch cushion. Okay. So, you can use all of your Photoshop knowledge to your advantage when it comes to textures. You can layer things like wear and tear in dirt. You can layer scratches, all sorts of things. And that's just the color part of it. I'll do another video here that'll kind of cover the specular and the bump side of things, and ways that you can layer that, and ways that you can kind of isolate just those individual textures and evaluate how those are doing on their own. So you can accurately judge them.